What's up, a Cinema Shogun here, and I just stumbled across the most cringiest The Rings of Power article released yet. And listen, I know that is a bold claim because we have been giving cringe article after cringe article after cringe article, and it seems like everything surrounding the Rings of Power is just one big cringe fest. But please bear with me while I read you all this article and react to it, because man, oh man, it is like cringe gold. I feel like I'm in the mines of Moria, just pecking away, looking for some morsels of more funny, stupid articles written by SJWs who are having a complete meltdown because people don't like the Rings of Power. But here is the title of the article: A racist backlash to the Rings of Power puts Tolkien's legacy into focus. As if anything with the Rings of Power has anything to do with Tolkien's legacy. Now they're trying to act like, because they're getting pushback about their show, that this looks bad on Tolkien. This says a lot about Tolkien's legacy because his fans don't want us ruining, just crapping all over the source material. The people these days, people just have so much nerve. But let's go ahead and hop right into the article. For a time, it seemed as though a great shadow had passed over the world and then faded, still present, though not quite as ominous. There were those who could confidently believe they were seeing progress, a fantasy, perhaps, but not without value. Yet, there were those who sought the cover of that shadow to hide from their own insecurities, failings, and uselessness. They could not conceive of the endless potential of progress. Miserable little trolls left stewing in their own ugly ignorance and hatred, who sought regression, but proved too incompetent to succeed, even when emboldened by the lies from their weakened leader. Now, these words they are using right now, they are using those words to describe Tolkien fans. Make no mistake about it, everything I just read you was to describe Tolkien fans and their reaction to the Rings of Power. But trust me, they go way further. I could very easily be discussing Middle-earth, but I'm not. What I'm discussing is our very real world and social media as an extension of that world. For the past week, I have been bombarded with messages of hate, called the N-word, told to go back to Africa, and called on to be executed. I'll take things that never happened for 700, Alex. I can almost guarantee you all that this person did not receive any of this hate. Who even is this person writing the article? A nobody. I can only assume this person has not dealt with online hate because you like the Rings of Power. How is that even possible? The Rings of Power just came out. So this is just all bogus nonsense. It's virtue signaling. It's playing the victim. Oh, I've been getting so much hate for liking the Rings of Power. Listen, I run multiple YouTube channels. I get so much hate for my opinions. Do you see me sitting here and crying about it? No. Yet this article is simply put here to play the victim and to paint Tolkien fans as racist for not liking the Rings of Power. The reason I've been getting bombarded with this hate? The Lord of the Rings. It would almost be laughable if it wasn't so profoundly sad. A wealth of stories and a willingness to believe in wizards, Balrogs, giant spiders, and magical swords. But allow people of color to exist in Middle-earth? Well, that's an affront to all that's good and decent. At least that's the primary argument for those ruinous trolls apparently review bombing and harassing fans of color over Amazon's The Rings of Power series. There is no review bombing of the Rings of Power. I know that a lot of people may be new to this realm, but we've been fighting this battle for a while now. Every time they release a new garbage series or movie, and they get pushback from fans, and this goes for any movie studio out there right now, they basically accuse the fans of being racist. And what they've been doing lately over at Disney and now here at Amazon, they go ahead and out the gate, while they're promoting the show, weeks and months before the show comes out, they go ahead and accuse the real fans of just being racist and misogynist and bad people. And it frightens weak-minded people into feeling like, oh, I better not criticize this show. I better not criticize this movie, because then I'll be labeled as a bad person and they'll put all of these labels on me. So it almost like it beats people into a corner and it scares them. And that's the reason why you don't see as much people pushing back, or you don't hear as much about it, is because a lot of people are scared these days to even properly rate or critique a movie or a TV series, because if that movie happens to have some type of diversity or some type of women in it, then you're labeled a bad person. So they've been doing this from the get-go. This article does not surprise me one bit. There has been no review bombing for the Rings of Power. I went through hundreds and hundreds of reviews and comments, and all of them seem like they're from people who actually watched the show and actually hated the show. In fact, most of the reviews were way more lenient on the show than I am. So I really can't blame any of these people. The review bombing, it's nonsense. There is a lot of positive review bombing coming from SJWs who don't care anything about Tolkien. They don't care anything about superheroes. They don't care about any of this stuff. They just know that this stuff is now used as a weapon to promote their lifestyles and things like that. So they go and leave these positive reviews despite the fact that they never watch these shows because they're too busy creating new pronouns and random stuff like that. I have been a J.R.R. Tolkien fan. No, I have been a fan of Tolkien's world for almost as long as I can remember. Really? Wait. How are you a fan of Tolkien's world if you didn't see yourself properly represented? It's almost as if you could be a fan of something without seeing yourself represented. I'm a fat dude. I love comic book characters. Most of those characters are physically fit. I don't see myself represented. Do you see me throwing a hissy fit because, man, god damn it, freaking Wolverine isn't fat enough for me? No, like, please stop with this weirdness. But it's funny because the point this person is trying to make, they dismantle their own point within this article. Let's go forward. I have been a fan of Tolkien's world for almost as long as I can remember. I grew up watching Rankin and Bass, The Hobbit 1977, and The Return of the King 1980 on repeat. When it was time for school book fairs, I was the class early adopter of Tolkien's works. Not just The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and The History of Middle-earth. I did my 5th grade biography report on C.S. Lewis and his friendship with Tolkien. When Ralph... See, this is blowing my mind right here because they're describing how they were such a fan of Tolkien growing up. But the only thing was, growing up, there was no, elves and hobbits of color. So how were you a fan then? But now you feel as if you can't be a fan unless there's, diversity hires and race swaps. It makes no sense. When The Lord of the Rings 1978 was re-released on VHS, my mom took me to the store to buy it on the day it was released. In middle school, I spent my bus rides listening to The Lord of the Rings on audio cassettes. And when Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings came out, the films defined my adolescence as much as Star Wars and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man: The Fellowship of the Ring was. The Fellowship of the Ring was the first DVD I ever owned. I'm sorry, forgive me here, but I feel like this person's being like, is kind of lying. You were born in 1978, but wait, hold on. I am really confused as to what's going on here. I guess they're saying they grew up watching this stuff. I don't know. It seems like this person's age is kind of off. Like, you were an adolescent watching Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, but you act as if you were there when these other Lord of the Rings shows came out. I guess that's not what they were trying to say. Maybe I'm wrong here, but let's just go ahead and march forward. In middle school, I spent my bus rides listening to the Lord of the Rings on audio cassettes, and when Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings came out, the films defined my adolescence as much as Star Wars and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. The Fellowship of the Ring was the first DVD I ever owned. Same here. Very first DVD I ever owned was The Fellowship of the Ring. I remember that day like it was yesterday, getting that movie. And I watched it so damn much. Man, way too much. I collected every single Burger King goblet. So did I. And played every video game, despite being admittedly terrible at most of them. Oh my God, this person is almost like me. It's weird because this person is almost describing my relationship with Tolkien. Like, growing up, going to the book fairs, grabbing Tolkien books, reading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings well before kids my age were reading books like that. Loving the movie, collecting the goblets, buying the video games, and never beating them because they were too difficult. I went through all of this same stuff. And it's sad knowing that this person had such a rich experience with Tolkien, and then they grew up to be a complete twat that's only worried about race. How could you sit here, play all of these video games, collect all of the Burger King cups, read all of the books, do book reports, all of this, and then grow up to be a twat that acts like no one can like Lord of the Rings unless there's diversity hires? So disappointing. It shows how life works. Some people go on like weird trails while other people go down the right path. I like to believe that I went down the right path because obviously I didn't end up like a weirdo obsessed with race and, SJW politics. I say all of this not to cast myself as an expert on all things Middle-earth, but to paint the picture that this world of fantasy is an inherent part of me, as key to my makeup as DNA. So why shouldn't I be able to feel the joy of seeing people who resemble me within Middle-earth? What makes me less deserving of this pop culture heritage? The same way I don't deserve to see a fat white dude with a beard and a Tommy Hilfiger sweater on, walking around Wakanda while I'm watching Black Panther. What is this obsession with like, oh, this character has to look like me for me to like this character? I can't think of many characters in the history of pop culture that I really like that look kind of like me. I like Eric Cartman from South Park. I guess that's close. But never have I ever read a single novel, a comic book, played a video game, watched a movie or a TV series, and just like, oh, you know what? I don't like that character because he's not fat and white. Not good enough for me. I can't connect with this. I've never felt this feeling. And I've always enjoyed and watched movies and TV shows that were made to appeal to various different cultures. I loved kung fu movies growing up. There wasn't really many white people in the kung fu movies I watched. Never was I like, man, I wish Bruce Lee was kicking more white people's asses. If diversity wasn't there, it wasn't there. If it didn't fit into the story. When I was watching movies that were, generally made for black audiences. I was never watching Friday and like, man, how come Chris Tucker isn't white so I can identify with him? No, I just loved the movie. I loved what I got and I accepted what I got. Never in my mind did I ever think there needs to be more of this race, more of this gender, more of this sexuality. No one in their right mind thinks that way unless you've been conditioned to become a social justice warrior of nothingness. But let's go forward. At this point, I've heard every argument in the book against the white cast members, Lenny Henry, Ishmael Cruz Cordova, yada, 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 all these people, Sophia Nomvet, shouldn't play Harfoots, elves, dwarves, or even humans in Middle-earth, where Amazon's series is set. The most common refrain is that Tolkien didn't include people of color in his stories. Not only is this untrue, as Harfoots are described as having browner skin, but Tolkien didn't often make a point to describe skin color, though he occasionally leaned on the open-ended fairer than. Tolkien definitely described skin color on multiple occasions throughout his works. Yes, he would talk about fair skin elves, and I think we know what fair skin means. When he talked about darker colored people, he was typically talking about your darker color, I don't know exactly what to call them, but like Greeks and Italians and what have you. They had darker skin than the average person over from England or wherever. He wasn't necessarily talking about, people of color, if you will. He was talking about darker shades of European people and stuff like that. And that is known. That's not a secret. That is known. But they want to play around and act like they don't know what's going on here. But listen, going into the show, yes, there's been a lot of talk about race swapping characters. There's been a lot of talk about forced diversity. I am no fan of neither. I have called it out as well. But I can promise you, once you watch this show, the diversity hires and the race swaps and the races of people who normally wouldn't be in a Tolkien story, that is the least of your worries because the show is so bad. If this show did a good job at telling a story, people would eventually shut up and not worry about the race and color of people eventually. There would be some still complaining, but I feel like people would be way more forgiving if you actually put out a good product. The reason why people are so against movies and TV shows that are all about diversity hires and, and all of that nonsense, it's because every time they make a movie or a TV show, when that's one of the main talking points, it turns out that there's no love or anything put into the show or movie. It's all about the diversity. And that's what's happened with the Rings of Power. It's obvious that diversity came way before storytelling and before writing dialogue and all of that stuff, because even the diversity hires within the show, they don't give them much to work with. It's poor acting, and I don't even believe it's poor acting because of the actors and actresses. I believe it's poor acting because they gave them nothing to work with. They basically checked off boxes. Hey, we hired this color person, this race of person, this race of person. Job here is done. We don't have to give them any good lines. We don't have to make them likable characters. None of that. There was no time spent on any of that. You cannot connect with a single character in this series. Going forward. Yet there remains the idea that because Tolkien sought to create an English mythology, that he intended Middle-earth to be comprised only of white people. This ignores the individuals of color who have populated England throughout its history, and the first modern Britons had dark skin based on DNA evidence taken from the Cheddar Man. Now this person is going through history, trying to use archaeological finds to try to explain why they put people of color in the Rings of Power. Listen, Tolkien wrote his books I don't care what happened in this world or that world, what happened in Tolkien's world. We all know what happens in Tolkien's world because it's written down. We've read it for years, and y'all are the ones desperately trying to change it instead of creating your own thing. You don't care about creating your own thing. You only care about destroying other things. And while there's no sense in speculating on the reactions of a dead man who could not possibly fathom the 21st century by the time of his death in 1973, Tolkien was notably anti-racist. Even for the time period, biographers have noted Tolkien was very much opposed to the Aryan ideology popularized by the Yazidis and of colonialism in South Africa. Oh my God. What does that have to do with anything? No one ever claimed that Tolkien was racist but your side. Our side has been fighting for Tolkien all along. Your side has basically implied that Tolkien is a racist bad person on multiple occasions, simply because he didn't write in black elves in his stories. So you having to put out Tolkien didn't agree with Hitler. Obviously, we freaking know that, you idiot. Your side is the one acting like he did. Oh my God. While there are those, a number of Twitter accounts have sought to remind me, who believe orcs are intended to be Tolkien's perspective on people of color, blah, 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 blah. Here we go with that conversation. I don't even want to freaking entertain that conversation. But here's the thing. Even though Tolkien's early 20th century progressiveness was not the same as the progressive attitudes of today, it has no bearing on an adaptation or an extension of his works. Things change. The movies and TV released in 1954, when The Fellowship of the Ring came out, obviously looked very different in terms of casting choices than what we see today. As such, The Rings of Power looks different from Peter Jackson's films from 20 years ago. Systems adapt. People formerly denied opportunities to showcase their talent or afforded a spotlight in which they can and do earn it. Listen, I'm sorry. Nothing against the people in The Rings of Power, but they did not earn it. They're forced hires for diversity reasons. And I'm not taking anything away from their talent. I'm sure they're perfectly talented people. The Rings of Power doesn't show that. But in other bodies of work, I'm sure they're perfectly talented. But they were hired for one reason and one reason only. And the only reason why everyone is so defensive about that is because they know it's true. I mean, if it wasn't true, if it was just hogwash, something that's just blasphemy, oh my God, how could you even think that? Then there would be no need for people to so adamantly defend the fact that, oh, they were hired because they earned it. No, they weren't. They really weren't. I'm sorry, but that is a lie. Audiences of color who have been asked to and excelled at empathizing with white people throughout the history of visual media can wish to see themselves on screen and see those wishes validated. I agree with that. I agree with there being more stories and more representation in future movies and TV shows when it's original content. For instance, if I were to sit down and write a story today, a new story, there would be diversity in there. There would be characters from every color and background imaginable. I do think that people in the modern day, I don't see anything wrong with diversifying your cast and your characters. It only makes sense. But I don't think you should be forced to. You should be able to tell whatever story you want to tell. And when it comes to stories that were already told, I think we should do our best to honor those stories that were already told. Now, if you want to take inspiration from Tolkien, and create your own fantasy world that is way more diverse, then have at it. I will probably support it if it's good. But you don't have to come in and try to tear everything down that was created just because you felt like there wasn't enough representation back then. I want to make it clear that I don't just have a problem when white characters are race swapped. I have a problem when characters are race swapped in general. I absolutely hate the fact that we got a white Goku in Dragon Ball Evolution. That was absolute freaking garbage. I love Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z live action, it was freaking ruined by nonsense. That was terrible. I hated Jake Gyllenhaal as the Prince of Persia. The Prince of Persia games were cool, but damn, you couldn't find a Persian, you couldn't find a brown person, anything, you casted Jake Gyllenhaal? That was ridiculous. Growing up, I used to watch movies about ancient Egyptians and stuff like that, and half the time they would be played by white people. I don't want to see that in 2022. I don't want to see a movie about Egypt coming out in 2022 with an all-white cast. That is stupid. And I feel the same way when it comes to the Rings of Power. I don't want to see a Lord of the Rings story that doesn't resemble the Lord of the Rings, where you do things to make it seem to fit more with modern day politics and you're not worried about the source material. Everything about this show, if you actually watch it, you can tell like story comes last. Honoring Tolkien definitely comes at bottom of the barrel. First is diversity, strong women, and it's just so sickening and boring and it's a drag. Oh man, we're going to power through the rest of this article though. I promise you all it's almost over. If you're still here, let me know down in the comments below, and I appreciate you all hanging with me. If anything, Rings of Power has an opportunity to be more inclusive in future seasons. While the cast features Black, Latino, MENA, and Pacific Island actors, there is, as of now, a lack of Asian performers, which actor Ludi Lin noted last year. Oh my God. It's never enough. It's never enough. They diversified the hell out of Middle-earth. But now it's like, oh, wait. Looks like you don't got enough Asians for us. Let's complain. We need more Asian hobbits now, too. You know who's not even thinking about this? Asians. I don't think any Asian out there is sitting there like, yeah, we need Asian hobbits. That's what we need. They don't care. Asians, regardless of what country you're from, they have their own mythology. I grew up loving Chinese and Japanese mythology more than I love Tolkien. I'm all about the romance of the three kingdoms. I'm all about feudal Japan and the samurai. I mean, my name is Cinema Shogun. Do you know what a shogun is? When I was reading through the ancient scrolls and materials that were left behind from centuries ago in China, do you think I was reading it like, man, not enough white people in this story, I can't connect with it? No. I connected with the ancient Chinese and Japanese mythology more than I did white mythology, if you will. How is that? If I'm not Asian, how am I able to enjoy this stuff? It's almost as if you can enjoy things without being the same race as the people who created it. What do you know? Jesus. Chinese, British, I don't even want to go through all of this. They're basically crying about the fact that there's not enough Asians in the Rings of Power now. And that just makes no sense to me at all. What the discourse over the Rings of Power has made clear is we're living with the rationalization of racism. People who constantly consume corporate media to give their little smooth brains some character while boasting profile pics from popular IP are now crying that the fans of Rings of Power are supporting the evil ethics of Amazon and Jeff Bezos. So-called Tolkien purists are using Jackson's films as armor to support all-white casting, despite the fact that Jackson and co-writers made many significant changes to Tolkien's novels when adapting them to film. And that's true. There were changes within the Lord of the Rings films and the books. But everyone knows who reads books. The movies are always going to be a little different. You can't capture every single detail from a book in a movie. You simply don't have time. Even in the extended editions of the Lord of the Rings films. And I'm talking hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of movie. You still can't do the book's justice. But the difference between Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and the Rings of Power is you could tell that Peter Jackson cared about Tolkien's work. He wanted to honor Tolkien's work. Yeah, he spruced up some fighting and action scenes here and there, but that was just for the visual appeal. And I think we can all agree that those were some of the best movies ever created in the history of the world. And there was a love in those films. I read Tolkien's books, and I feel the heart and the spirituality in those books. The essence, the enchantment, and all of that is also within Peter Jackson's films. It's not in the Rings of Power. The Rings of Power is dry, it's desolate, it has no feelings, it has no emotions, it has no charm. It is nothing. It's like the empty part of your bag of chips. You go buy a bag of Lay's and it looks like you got a big family-sized bag, but it turns out the chips only go to about right here. You know that portion of just potato chip air that's in your bag? That's what the Rings of Power is. It's potato chip air. It smells bad. It's not refreshing to breathe. But it's there, and you paid for it. Everything else, though, that is said within this article is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I understand that Tolkien purists had a problem with some of what was going on in Peter Jackson's movies, but they got over it. I want you all to understand, I'm not a Tolkien purist. I am very forgiving when it comes to making changes and doing things to adapt books to film. I get it. But there's some lines that you don't cross. And Amazon crossed all of those lines while simultaneously delivering us a boring product that no one really seems to like. And of course, there's the tried and true argument. People of color should make their own stories instead of inserting themselves in existing worlds. This person just keeps going on a rant. I think I'm going to end this here because it literally boils down to the point where they start talking about how they feel unsafe walking to the corner store. And it's like, that's where it really lost the plot. I am making a concentrated effort to keep these matters as light as they possibly can be, to prod at the absurdity of it all. But the reality is that being told you cannot exist in a fantasy world, that you cannot be an elf because you have a fade, or a dwarf because the climate wouldn't cultivate dark skin, while also being unable to exist freely in the real world, in which every walk through a neighborhood could be your last, where simply going shopping can get you shot, and where blinking lights from a cop car are a reason for anxiety, is egregious and grotesque. So now they're basically saying, hey, We can't exist in Tolkien's world and we can't exist in the real world because everyone's out to get us. And it's like, what? Did you really just try to make that comparison and pull the ultimate victim card? And the sad part is all of this is coming from someone who's been a Tolkien fan all of their life, but just now came to the realization that they can't like Tolkien anymore without representation. It's because this SJW way of thinking, it's new. This woke way of thinking, it's relatively new. So when this person was growing up, they were free to be a fan of Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. But now they're told they can't be a fan because there's not enough people of color in there. It's funny because they want to view Tolkien fans as gatekeepers, that we're trying to gatekeep and keep people out of our fandom. But in reality, they're the gatekeepers, because what they're trying to say is, hey, you can't be a fan of this, you can't be a fan of that, and you can't like that because there's not people in that and in that and in that that look like you. That's the mentality these people are trying to bring down. Hey, if you can't identify with the characters in this movie or this show or this book, then you cannot be a fan. And that is horrible. That is exactly what Tolkien was against. So these people are guilty of everything they claim that everyone is guilty of. They are the true racists because they're the ones hyper-focused on race. Here we are. The show's already came out. No one even cares about the race of the characters anymore. We're all talking about how the show is garbage, but instead of defending the show on its own merits, they're still hyper-focused on, it's because you don't like this character because of skin color. No, it's because the show is garbage. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and I'll talk to you all on the next video.